thank you everybody for joining us today. Sorry, we had just a little minor glitch, so we were running just a couple minutes behind, but we got everything taken care of. And I'm Sherry with the Nevada Historical Society, and I'm the curator of history. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. And we just love having people enjoy our programming. And if you have ideas and suggestions, please let us know. So without further ado, let me introduce our High Noon program host, Mr. Neal Cobb, who is one of our honorary curators, who has been a longtime supporter of the Historical Society and is always promoting us with any program and talk that he does within the community. And so we greatly appreciate his support throughout the years. So we really appreciate this partnership that we work with Neal, coming up with great topics. And I think people will really enjoy this summer series as we're starting to include speakers that work at different museums around the state. So I hope you'll keep an eye out for our programs as we continue to try to give you a nice variety of Nevada topics. So let me introduce Neal, and thank you, Neal, for being here today and lining up Dr. Fischer.
Thank you, Sherry. Our speaker today, Dr. Michael E. Fischer, was appointed the director of the Department of Cultural Affairs by Governor Jim Gibbons in January of 2007, and served in the Sandoval administration until Cultural Affairs was merged with the tourism. Prior to that, he practiced dentistry in Gardnerville for 31 years. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Nevada, class of 1971, and a Doctor of Dental Surgery degree from the University of Southern California, class of 1975. Dr. Fischer brings many years of private sector cultural affairs management. He has served several terms on the board of directors of the Western Folklife Center, the group responsible for the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko. He was chairman of that board for 4 years, a life member of the Douglas County Historical Society. He was both a board member and president of the organization. Presently, he is secretary to the Thunderbird Lodge Preservation Society and vice president of the Nevada Archaeological Foundation. Dr. Fischer served 8 years as a Douglas County commissioner with multiple terms as chairman. He also spent 8 years on the Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority, working with cultural and tourism related events. His interest in Nevada history began as a child when the family visited historic sites around the state. He portrays Governor John Sparks, and when he does that, he is John Sparks. And the Nevada agricultural pioneer, H.F. Danberg Sr. in the Chautauquan performances. He has been and continues to be involved with the conversion of H.F. Danberg's home ranch into one of Douglas County's newest and oldest attractions. So at this time, please welcome Dr. Michael Fischer.
Thank you, Neal. It's clear that with Zoom, you don't have to worry about anybody throwing tomatoes at you, and I'm always happy for that. Today, I wore my best prop so that I would appear in the film noir, Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade type world, because this program is directly from that type of both movie and real life. Babyface Nelson in Nevada. Why the time he spent here is significant. Nelson was born December 6, 1908. His given name was Lester Joseph Gillis. He would not live to see his 26th birthday. He died in the same violent manner in which he lived his life, just 19 miles from where he was born, yet he had traveled all over the country. His appearance belied his vicious nature. He stood a whopping 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed a mere 135 pounds. Indeed, Nelson's entire life was a study in contrasts. Often nattily attired with an unwrinkled face befitting his age, Nelson's criminal activities started early. At 12, he shot a fellow classmate on the playground with a gun he had found. That act earned him a year in an Illinois penal school for problem boys. After 1923 and ending about 1928, Nelson worked in a legitimate neighborhood service station, giving the appearance of being a changed man. It was really a front, and he used the neighborhood contacts he made to sell various tires and parts stolen from cars in the area. Perhaps the biggest contradiction in Nelson's deranged life was raising a family. This is Helen Wozniak, and the spelling definitely varies. You can find it spelled any number of different ways, who in 1928 became Mrs. Lester Gillis. They would have 2 children, Ronald and Darlene. During times of criminal activity, other family members would keep the children, while Helen commonly accompanied Nelson. On the night he was shot and later died, Helen was at his side. After his 1928 marriage and until 1931, Nelson was constantly upgrading his criminal skills and activities. From fencing stolen goods at the Standard Oil Station, he became involved with Roger the Terrible Toohey's gang as a driver of illegal alcohol shipments. This would later prove handy when he came to Nevada. From there, he branched out into armed robbery and simple bank robbery. He even stole $18,000 worth of jewels from the wife of Chicago's mayor, on the left in this picture, Big Bill Thompson. Big Bill and Mary are on the left, and Mary's to Bill's left. Trying to figure out what happens when you switch sides. When asked if she could describe who had stolen the jewels, she said, I don't know. He just had a baby face. And the nickname was born. In 1931, a 23-year-old Nelson was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 1 year in the Illinois State Penitentiary at Joliet. With such a light sentence, authorities wanted Nelson off the street for a longer period of time. They knew about only a portion of his actual criminal activity, but wanted him to face trial for some of the other crimes of which they were aware. En route back to Joliet after his latest trial, Nelson escaped, and his friends in the Toohey gang soon had him shipped off to Reno, Nevada. Nelson was to meet gambler William Curly Bill Graham. Like the Tooheys, Graham was of Irish descent. Nelson arrived in Reno in March 1932. Now, for those of you not familiar with this view, this is Center Street. And it's at a time when Center Street ended at the sheds on the far end as you look up toward the university, and ended at the river on the south end. The Hotel Golden, in fact, that entire block on the left is pretty much where Harrah's Casino stood and now stands as whatever they're calling it today. Interestingly, on the right was Parker's Menswear, where many of the basques in the world would come and get their outfits to go out and be shepherds after coming to America from the Basque lands. And further up the right-hand side were other casinos. In fact, most of the gambling in Reno in 1931 occurred on Center Street and not on Virginia Street. Nelson was a known quantity in Illinois, but unknown in the West. Bill Graham and his partner, Jimmy the Cinch McKay, owned the Bank Club on the left, the Willows, the Stockade, and the Rex Club. All were involved in legal gambling and illegal liquor. The stockade was a house of prostitution with 49 or 50 individual workrooms. Reno's 1932 population was less than 20,000 people and probably closer to 15,500. From those small numbers, one would assume that newcomers would be quite noticeable, but this was not the case. The 1931 legislature had shortened the residency requirement for a divorce to 6 weeks, and it allowed all gambling to move to the street level. The state was heavily criticized for these changes, and wide open Nevada was considered immoral and corrupt by the people of most other states. The moral view did not keep many of those same critics from visiting our state for a divorce or to try legal gambling. Among those many visitors, Nelson thought he could hide out. Graham and McKay were also incredibly well connected, both politically and financially. Local Reno connections included Mayor E.E. Roberts in the background with a cigar sticking out of his mouth, a former congressman, Chief of Police Joe Kirkley in the middle, Washoe County Sheriff Russell Trathson on the far right, also pictured as the former heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Dempsey. At this time, he was one of the world's most famous and recognizable men. Graham and McKay's Nelson's local benefactors had connections which extended all the way to the governor's mansion. And Governor Friendly Fred Balzar on the left next to Graham. However, even with these connections, Graham knew Nelson could not stay too long without being recognized, and shortly after his Reno arrival, he sent Nelson off to meet with his friend and criminal cohort, Jim Griffith of the Andromeda Bar in San Francisco. Griffith owned this bootleg speakeasy and was well connected in San Francisco boxing and crime circles. He would later connect Nelson with Joseph Fatso Negri of the Peretti Brothers bootlegging ring. Griffith owned the Andromeda, pictured here in the contemporary photo. Nelson and Negri met upstairs beyond the very unusual fan with the lights in the balcony. They stayed in the balcony removed from the prying eyes of the other bar patrons. Negri, pictured here, Anthony Joe Soap Moreno. He was nicknamed Joe Soap because he always made clean deliveries of illegal liquor. John Paul Chase and Nelson would become liquor runners for Joseph Parenti. Moreno would drive, and Chase and Nelson, heavily armed, would follow the delivery truck in a car. They made deliveries in the Bay Area, but also to their Nevada customers, who included Bill Graham and James McKay. By September of 1932, Nelson had tired of running bootleg liquor and returned to Reno to serve as a bodyguard and chauffeur for both Graham and McKay. He was a constant problem because of his erratic behavior. Once, while going to the Calneva with McKay, Calneva is pictured here early on, with McKay, they were stopped by a policeman because the car had a tail light which wasn't working properly. Nelson was going to shoot the officer, but McKay talked him out of it quickly, and he didn't kill the policeman. After that, McKay was never comfortable with Nelson's unruly behavior and potential to become instantly violent. It was in November of 1932 that Nelson would meet this man, Alvin Creepy Karpis. Alvin and other members of the Barker, yes, Ma Barker, Karpis gang were in Reno to launder money and vacation while the police searched for them in the Middle West. Both Karpis and Nelson would become, at separate times, America's most wanted fugitive. Graham and McKay's bank club was very instrumental in laundering money. They could take dirty money and dilute it with the casino's earnings, and therefore, since it was in the West and removed quite by 2,000 miles or so from where the bank robberies occurred, it was not found. Despite the allure of drinking, gambling, and eating in fine places like the Townhouse and the Rex Club, by the spring of 1933, Nelson wanted to return to the Middle West. And this is a constant pattern. He's in the West cooling off, in the Middle West making money. He had heard tales from the Barkers and the Carpuses, and he wanted to hit the big time as a criminal. The heat had died down for him in the Middle West, and he wanted to up the ante. At Carpus's suggestion, he met with the famous bank robber, Ed Bentz. Nelson then learned the finer points of bank robbing from Bentz, who was considered the best in the business. On August 18, 1933, he, Bentz, and Nelson robbed their first bank together in Grand Haven, Michigan. However, this caused trouble with Frank Nitti of the Capone gang because Bentz had used a robber who was from the Capone gang rivals, the Toohey gang. The Irish Toohey gang and the Italian-based Capone gang were mortal enemies in Chicago. Because of that problem with the Capone gang, Nelson in September of 33 was on his way to St. Paul, Minnesota. Using his connections at the Greenlight Tavern, Nelson would recruit members for his own gang. And on October 23, 1933, they robbed the First National Bank of Brainerd, Minnesota, of $32,000. On the lam, they immediately headed for San Antonio, Texas. Nothing in life is ever simple. Tommy Carroll, a Nelson gang member, shot and killed a detective in San Antonio. And by December 18, 1933, Nelson and Helen were again on their way back to Reno to cool off. They would get their Hudson Essex Terraplane fixed at Frank Cochran's Air Service garage on the left in this photo. It was then on to San Francisco, where he again found Faso Negri outside Spider Kelly's on Pacific Street in the Barbary Coast district of San Francisco. He also found and partnered with John Paul Chase, his friend from the Parenti bootlegging days. From December 1933 until November 1934, Chase and Nelson would be almost inseparable. During Nelson's last and most violent year of life, Chase would be his most consistent companion and criminal co-conspirator. Together, they likely descended into the hellish world of paid assassination. Having cooled off in Reno in the Bay Area, early in March 1934, they were found in Minneapolis, another safe haven for criminal types. The local authorities would not bother criminals in Minneapolis if they did not engage in criminal activities in that local area. Nelson violated the rule by killing Theodore Killer after a minor traffic accident. It was assumed that Kidder, a mob associate, was targeted by his former compatriots and that Nelson merely did the, in terms of the CIA, wet work. John Dillinger, pictured here, soon became America's most wanted criminal. He had just escaped from the Crown Point, Indiana jail early in March of 1934. By the 13th of March, Dillinger and Nelson had engaged in a bank robbing spree, and Nelson was again on his way west. Nelson, because of his erratic behavior and violent nature, was disliked and distrusted by many of Dillinger's gang members. Leaving Minneapolis was obviously a necessity. Nelson and Chase dropped Helen and the kids off in Washington, And by March 20th, the dates become important now, 1934, Nelson's car is again in Frank Cochran's Air Service garage. Chase is in Reno with Nelson. Bill Graham, and this is very important, is in San Francisco, and James McKay is in New York City. These are all important pieces in the puzzle of one of Reno's most enduring missing person cases, the disappearance of Roy Frisch. Roy Frisch, the last cashier in George Wingfield's Riverside Bank, which was located on the corner of Riverside Drive in Virginia, there, kind of would be the northeast corner of that building, was scheduled to be a witness in the bunco trial of Bill Graham and James McKay in the Southern District of New York. The Southern District of New York, why? Well, the United States attorney knew a fair trial was impossible in Reno because of the local influence of Graham and McKay. On March 22nd, 1934, Roy left the family's Court Street home to see the movie Gallant Lady at the Majestic Theater. Roy walked down Court Street, up Virginia Street, and past the now closed Riverside Bank. As the cashier for the bank, he had seen transactions occur which now haunted him. Being the witness against powerful and influential men was vexing. On his way home, he was abducted, beaten, and was never seen again. Although they were never charged, tried, or convicted, the abductors and likely murderers were Babyface Nelson and John Paul Chase. Upon his arrival in Reno, Nelson had told some people that he had a job to do for Bill Graham. Roy Frisch was that job. From March 22nd, 1934 until now, neither Frisch nor his remains have ever been found. Chase would later state and then recant a story that he and Nelson had abducted Frisch. He would also state that Nelson killed Frisch and that they had dumped his body in a mine shaft. Nelson and Chase had been in Reno on March 22nd. By coincidence, they left town in William Weissman's Buick the same night Frisch disappeared. That burned out Buick was later found in the Bay Area. They left Nelson's Hudson in Reno, and Chase had left all of his belongings in his hotel room. Shortly after the Frisch abduction, Fatso Negri would drive to Reno to retrieve Chase's clothes. The day after Frisch disappeared, Chase would meet with Bill Graham at the Sir Francis Drake in San Francisco, Sir Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco. When Frisch disappeared, both Graham and McKay were conveniently well out of Reno. Nelson now had entered a new realm. Harming a primary witness in a federal trial, along with other nefarious acts, would land him on a trajectory to become America's most wanted criminal. Nowhere was there now a safe haven for him. The heat from the federal authorities was on high in the West. Nelson would try and avoid it with trips back to the Midwest, where he would meet with other members of the Dillinger gang here at the Little Bohemia Lodge in Wisconsin. Nelson further sealed his fate when he killed Bureau of Investigation agent W. Carter Baum at this place on April 22nd, 1934. Not until June 1934 would Negri fly to Reno and, after a secret meeting with Tex Hall, recover Nelson's Hudson Essex Terraplane, which had been stored all that time in Frank Cochran's home garage. Now the heat in the Midwest was also on high. A constable who was accompanying Baum, pictured here, was also seriously wounded. Nelson now had killed a federal agent and a federal witness. When public enemy number one, John Dillinger, was killed outside a Chicago theater on July 22nd, 1934, much of the Bureau's expertise would now focus on Nelson, who was in the Hudson and with another car headed west. The group included Helen, Chase, Jack Perkins and his wife, baby, and Fatso Negri. During the night of July 26, 1934, Nelson was at the Calneva asking Kex Hall, one of Graham and McKay's most trusted proteges, to hide him out. Hall was sick and refused to hide Nelson. According to Negri, Nelson and the other car had avoided the agricultural inspection station by going to the Calneva and then on to Truckee. Nelson stayed overnight at Truckee, while the other car, which also had Illinois plates, entered California. 2 Illinois cars in a row would have raised suspicions. Nelson left Truckee and late in July went to Hard Hat Louis Parenti's, the brother of the bootlegger, El Verano Inn, pictured here in a contemporary photo. He was simply too recognizable. The group received a very cold reception and soon left. During the rest of July and into August, Nelson and his traveling group were staying in auto camps all over Northern California. The group by now is Chase, Negri, Sally Bachman, Perkins and his family, Nelson, and Helen Gillis. Bachman, who is Chase's girlfriend, does not get along with anyone else in the group. On August 9th, they buy camping supplies in Fallon at the Fallon Mercantile. From August 10th through August 24th, they stayed at the Mount Grant Lodge by Walker Lake. Other members of the group bought food and supplies while Nelson would stay secluded so no one would recognize him. They left Nevada and all traveled again to Illinois, but tensions were simply too great in the group. The Perkins family went to Chicago and stayed, and Chase and Bachman went to New York. On September 9th, 1934, Negri, Helen, and Nelson again headed west to Reno. Nelson had hit a bump at 80 miles an hour, and his Hudson automobile was badly damaged. Upon his return to Reno, he took it again to Frank Cochran for repairs and modifications. Cochran at various times put in switches to kill the taillights, added gas tanks, and generally improved the performance of Nelson's car. This time, he added a siren and repaired the damage from the bump. The bill was $200, and Nelson gave Cochran a $50 tip. Cochran also loaned Nelson his personal car, a Buick, while the repairs were being made. When the repairs were complete, Nelson returned to Cochran's home and picked up 3 bulletproof vests, a Browning automatic rifle, a machine gun, a .22 caliber rifle, a .30-06 rifle, and a suitcase full of ammunition, which were left there when they used Cochran's automobile. This fact's significant because later there's a harboring Nelson trial, and Cochran ends up serving time. His excuse was he had no idea who the man he knew as Jimmy Burnell or Jimmy Burnett was, and that he had no idea that he was a bad man. Now, with that list, again, 3 bulletproof vests, a Browning automatic rifle, a machine gun, a .22 caliber rifle, a .30-06 rifle, a suitcase full of ammunition, he probably wasn't selling Bibles door to door. After returning Cochran's Buick, Nelson and his crew had been to Vallejo to pick up $1,000 from Toby Williams, the proprietor of the Vallejo General Hospital. Sounds like an innocent guy, right? Williams bought the hospital after a successful safe-cracking career. Well, relatively successful, because one of his dynamite jobs blew the safe open, but also removed one of Williams' legs, which was now replaced by a prosthesis. Williams Hospital catered to both regular folks and big-time criminals. No questions were asked. In fact, he was very, very popular in Vallejo. Nelson and crew would travel all over with stops at both Fallon and Walker Lake, interspersed with trips to Reno. Finally, by October 4th, 1934, they set up camp here in this at Wally's Hot Springs in Douglas County. For close to a month and a half, they would stay in one of the cabins on the left. You can see there's 4 individual cabins and then a smaller one on the left-hand side of the picture. Nelson went to town here, actually got a haircut in Gardnerville. The crew went in and bought groceries at Glock's Groceries, and the sheriff even visited looking for a 1934 Hudson, which actually was there, but he did not recognize it as being a Hudson. In their defense, clearly there's no internet. There are newspapers, but the newspapers in the Middle West don't come out to the West. It was an information deprived area, and Douglas County was relatively small. By mid-November, the Nelson crew was low on money and headed back to Chicago. Nelson was the most wanted criminal in America, but the prospect of few jobs and money drove them in spite of the risks. At an average wage of $30 per month, or $360 a year, $5,000 was almost 14 years' wages. In 2016 dollars, that would be $89,592, and even more in 2022 dollars. So $5,000 was the reward for the most wanted criminal in America. 14 years worth of average folks' wages. But this time, fate was not on Jimmy's side. Nelson would die after the Battle of Barrington, Illinois. But so would 2 heroic agents, Samuel P. Cowley and Herman Hollis. Nelson would escape Barrington only to die in Wilmette, Illinois, and have his body dumped in a ditch by Helen and Chase. Thus would end the psychopathic and nefarious character of the only Douglas County resident who was concurrently the most wanted criminal in America. And that's the end.
That was wonderful. I like that. So can I ask you, how much time have you looked and did research on this project, on Babyface Nelson? And I know there's been books and movies, but I was just kind of curious on that question.
It actually amounts to hundreds of hours by the time you find the pictures, put the pictures together. I have to mention a book called Porch Light Burning, which Jolie Pahanic wrote about the I'm stuck on Fuchs, which is Jolie's dad's name. He became the primary witness after Frisch disappeared, and it disrupted their life. They spent time in New York City. Fuchs carried a gun. He actually, because Reno at the time was kind of divided with pro-Graham and McKay people and anti-Graham and McKay people, they moved to Northern California. And Jolie gave me all of her FBI files, which is tales, and you'll probably end up with them in your vertical file. It's 3 boxes of things on just the search for Frisch's body, putting Chase into the murder with Nelson. All of that is involved in that. Before I got that, I had done a great deal of it myself. It just takes you to other places. So easily hundreds of hours.
All right. So I have getting quite a few questions here. So why did Graham and his friends want Babyface? Was he their employee? So I guess you were saying that, he came out west to kind of for cool off, but then also started working for them. So do you know a little bit more about the connection, or why was it, family connections, or,
I think the original connection is Bill Graham was incredibly well connected with the criminal element. he loved boxing. The criminal element in San Francisco was, he had grown up in San Francisco. He was born in Pittsburgh, correctly, and grown up in San Francisco in a kind of low-end Irish neighborhood. He was a tough guy. The Reno papers are replete with him beating people up and whereas McKay was a little more sophisticated. He married movie stars. He married really pretty ladies, but they both came out of Tonopah. McKay was born in Virginia City. They came out of Tonopah, and as Tonopah died down, they came to Reno, but they had been in bootlegs, in prostitution, and in illegal gambling down there. They merely continued it up here. Toohey, the Irish connection, is the reason Nelson ends up in Reno, but they kept him around and used him when he wasn't doing the other stuff. The Parenti brothers were very, very big in bootlegging in Northern California. They'd have stuff come down the West Coast in boats. They'd speedboated ashore. That would be actual Canadian whiskey and Gilbey's gin, different things from England. And then they also had what they called jackass, where they made bootleg liquor. So he was just tied into that and therefore tied into them. And they were all on the left-hand side of the law.
Okay. The last slide. So is that truly a picture of Babyface Nelson? Kind of, was he growing a mustache and stuff, or?
That's the last photo of Babyface Nelson with his mustache and his kind of greasy hair after being pulled out of the ditch and they got shot in Barrington, and then he ended up, in the ditch just 26 miles from where he was born. And yes, that's kind of the police gloating over the fact that crime doesn't pay.
Okay. So you had mentioned he didn't reach his 26th birthday. Somebody was asking that. Okay. Right. Let's see, I have another question. In casual reading, I saw somewhere that Nelson lived in a house on Caliente Street in Reno. Is that your understanding, or do you know a little bit about that?
I cannot nail him down. 26. So he was born in 1908, and 26. He did not live to see his 26th birthday by about a month. He was killed in 1934 November. So he was just short of 26. He probably doesn't look like he weighed much more than 135 pounds either.
Yeah, for sure.
I've never been able to put Nelson in that house, and the address doesn't line up with another house on Caliente. But they change addresses, as you well know, as they remap and new houses come in. Graham, I gotta think now, McKay owned a house on Caliente in which his mother lived at one point in time later after this. So it's entirely possible that he did live on Caliente Street. In fact, it's probably likely that he lived there, but I've never been able to go to a directory or something where Jimmy Burnell or Jimmy Burnett is living at that address on Caliente. But the fact that the FBI files talk a little bit about it, the fact that they have, I'm pretty sure it's McKay, but Graham and McKay together, or whoever owned a piece of property on there that later had relatives in it, it's probably pretty likely that he did live on Caliente.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Now you mentioned Frank Cochran did serve time for helping Babyface Nelson with his cars, and how long did he spend time behind?
I believe it was about a year, and it's a real funny story. My mom and my aunt were both very good friends of Betty Cochran. I have pictures of them in bathing suits at Lawton's Hot Springs, swimming at the plunge or pool. But my aunt told me that everybody in town thought that Cochran had been framed. Everybody, because they were popular. Betty was very popular, and my mom and aunt were good friends, so they especially thought that Cochran had been framed. Highly unlikely. Not, Aunt Vi might have been wrong on this one.
Well, like you had mentioned, the fact that he was housing, all the extra firearms and weapons, that he picked up later. It's very
And
interesting.
why, if you're a Bible salesman, do you have a switch in your car that you can turn off your tail light? And if you're a Bible salesman, unless you're selling somewhere between Eureka and Austin up and down one of those valleys, do you need an extra gas tank on your car? Lots of little things like that just didn't, and Cochran did all that work. So, and Cochran was, he was a very popular man in Reno. I think Heitman from one of the dealerships up the road actually posted his bail. So, but he basically just confessed because they said, look, either you confess or your wife's going to jail and your daughter's going into, the home down in Carson for orphans. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's see. Was Jimmy happy that the press called him babyface? And did he write letters that were saved, or any documentation that, because he was always going back west or, Midwest to family. Do you know if there's materials still surviving from him?
It would be entirely possible. The children only died a few years ago. I tried to just see if I could make a connection, and it seemed to me that they were both dead by then. But his wife, I can't remember if she did time in the harboring. One of the reasons that the harboring Nelson trial was so pursued was that Nelson had killed the 3 Bureau of Investigation agents, and Hoover was very mad about that. He said those guys never would have died if these people hadn't worked at keeping this guy undercover, knowing full well who he was. So Negri and a bunch of those guys all did time for that. I can't remember if she did or didn't, but I think the answer is I've never seen anything that's a primary. Chase lived. He went to Alcatraz, recanted his confession basically, but was released later on to some sort of Catholic institution, if I recall correctly, and never got in trouble again. But there was one thing, if you notice in the narrative, it says he said that Nelson killed Frisch, and then he recanted that. But had Nelson killed Frisch and he was there, he's at least an accomplice to murder, and easily could have been, tried for first-degree murder. So with the fact that, you're likely to have done the same thing, helped abduct him, given Nelson's size, even though he was vicious, Chase was a bigger man, so he may well have helped subdue. So,
Yeah,
but no, I've never seen any primary stuff from Babyface Nelson.
Okay.
Or Jimmy Burnett or Jimmy Burnell or Lester Gillis.
Okay. Do you know, sometimes nicknames stick easily, like he got Babyface Nelson. Has anyone ever found any references or said that he liked that name or not? Yeah, that's one of our questions as well.
Never, I've not read a great deal of the material about Nelson. There's a book that talks about the gangster era, but I used it more as a roadmap to go back to primary sources to try and find material. rather than taking what they wrote in the book. Because as we discussed earlier, sometimes people repeat history that was written down previously. And unfortunately, if it was incorrect, it was just as incorrect the second time. So I tried to find as many primary FBI documents, contemporary newspaper documents, things like that.
Okay. And you're right. I mean, lore happens quite easily and just keeps getting perpetuated for sure. So yeah, so
And
this is
Ron
great.
James has told me that he made a living on lore, so he's very happy that that happened.
Yes, that's true too. But no, so and we have somebody saying, thank you, Mike, for all your research and your presentation. And it was great. And so I've always found this little bit of history fascinating, how Nelson just kept coming back and forth, and from Midwest to Nevada into California to kind of lay low. So it's a interesting part of Nevada's history. So it's definitely a great program. So Neal, did you have any comments or a question for Mike at all?
Well, not necessarily a question. I always like to compliment the man because he spends so much time documenting and preserving Nevada history. So we march to the same drummer. So yeah, it's important to know where you came from. It's our foundation. Nevada itself is not only a very special state with its beauty and its weather and the rest of it, but we have all of the colorful characters and the colorful reputation of the different legalities. And it's just, we have people right now that we can schedule that live up to the tradition of these same colorful people from yesteryear. And Michael is one of them.
Thank you.
No, it was very good. And thank you, because I've always found the Frisch mystery and story fascinating as well. And so, with the idea of, him getting dumped in the mine shaft, I've heard that before. So, makes you wonder if someday they might be able to find his body, and maybe not, but, you just never know what will happen. So
yeah, there was an FBI agent named John McLaughlin, and it's kind of hard because there's also a crook in the Middle West named John T. McLaughlin. But McLaughlin was the agent that was here most of the time after that. They had a number of agents but McLaughlin was here for a long period of time. Eventually, I believe, started Nevada Insurance Agency and quit the FBI. But he would lower himself down on a rope into mine shafts looking for the body. And they traced the route that Chase said that they had taken, and they went into any number of different mines. They tried very hard to find him. I mean, they really, really worked diligently trying to find him and never did. One quick story about John McLaughlin. When Nelson's at Wally's, the old road came down into Wally's right in front of those cabins and then back out. Nelson was on the side hill, and Graham and McKay basically told some people that Nelson was there. And then they told Nelson that the FBI was going to come looking for him. Well, and it's a great story. John McLaughlin's son told it to me, and Tex Hall's widow, Scarface Sullivan's widow told it to him. He had worked for Washoe County. He took a burn permit out to her house, and she said, they tried to kill your dad, don't you? And he goes, what do you, he said, when he was at the FBI, he left Reno, and I can't remember the judge's name, but he was the U.S. attorney at the time. They didn't trust the Reno police because they were so connected to Graham. They stopped in Carson and picked up a couple of deputies in Carson, drove out to Wally's just as they were going down the hill. Bowen, I think it's Judge Bowen. You can't trust me on that because it's a while back. Down the hill into Wally's, the judge goes, who was U.S. attorney at the time, later a district court judge, says, "My God, look at what time it is. You need to turn around because my mother-in-law is coming in on the train and I have to be there to pick her up." So just as they're getting ready to go down, where Nelson's on the side hill with a rifle to assassinate him, they flip around and leave. They said that Nelson was purely infuriated. And the story never came out until when McLaughlin's son was working for Washoe County, and he went to Scarface Sullivan's widow's house, and she told him the story. So they came within a half inch of getting killed.
That's quite amazing, actually. So, and just to finish that up, I just think it's interesting how he kept going and working with different mobsters and different guys,
Oh, yeah.
just so easily, regardless if they were mortal group enemies, so that's an interesting part I thought was good about your presentation.
It's such a different world, and I won't bore you with this for too long, but McLaughlin was there when they shot Dillinger, because the Bureau of Investigation was so small that they would have phones in their homes, and it would say, from Washington, they would say, "Be in Chicago on January 14th at such and such a place." And they would set up and go after, like, Dillinger. They shot Dillinger. The lady in red walked out with him, and they shot him outside that theater. When Ma Barker and one of her sons were in Florida, they got the same call. It said, "Be in such and such a place." And the federal agents would literally come together in these places to do the arrest. So it was, and not like they had 10 agents in Nevada. They had one here, one in San Francisco, one in Salt Lake, and they would call the ones and say, "Come and be here for this." Little Bohemia, where the agents, they said that McLaughlin was the bravest man there, because he's the only single man, after they killed those other two federal agents, the only single man among them. He volunteered to go up and throw a smoke grenade into the Little Bohemia Lodge. And by then, Nelson and those guys had all left. But had they still been there, it would have been a suicide mission. So they not only were wonderful agents, they were very, very, very brave.
Wow, that's interesting. And just one other comment, somebody mentioned they liked the fact that the guys, on the run, Nelson, that they were using auto parks and, kind of camping along the way to hide out. So, and yeah, I could totally see that happening, and people just wouldn't really know where they could be at. So
sure, and he could stay there, and they could go to town and buy the groceries or whatever supplies they needed. It's funny because he did violate that in Douglas County. I mean, he came in and actually got a haircut, and the sheriff did come out looking for him, thinking that but he didn't recognize the Hudson. I mean, just a different world. The information was not as accessible as it is now.
That's definitely true. So thank you so much, Dr. Fischer. We really appreciate it. It was a great program. I've learned a lot, and sounds like we definitely could have another program just on all the connections. And I know you've spent a long time researching on Graham and McKay, and so it was quite fascinating. So just thank you again. Thank you everybody for being here today. And I will send it back to Judy, and thank you, Washoe County Library.
Okay. Sherry, what a fantastic presentation, and I just love the discussion too, because you just learned so much more through that. I just want to thank all of you in the audience, and Sherry, and Neal Cobb, Dr. Michael Fischer with the Nevada Historical Society, and then also Russell. He's our behind-the-scenes tech for Washoe County Library System, and he really made this event happen today, and all of you made it possible, so I really appreciate all that. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.